Being aware of what you and your people do, whether it's how you behave, communicate, make decisions, take actions, can be the difference in the type of outcome you achieve. It's a bit like Gwyneth Paltrow in her sliding doors moment. Doing or not doing something in one way or another can have a ripple effect and could mean the difference between high and low performance, good or poor impact. In some sectors and organisations could literally mean the difference between life and death. That's why the study of human factors is becoming ever more relevant and important to organisations beyond those with a high safety focus. I'm Lee Griffith, a leadership strategy coach, and in the Leaders with Impact podcast, I'm proving it's possible to succeed without following outdated rules and old school stereotypes. I'm here to help you get clear on your personal strategy, implement some self-leadership and connect with those you serve through your communications so that you can deliver improved organisational performance, engagement and reputation. If you want more leadership insights, sign up to my monthly newsletter at sundayskies.com. In today's episode, I'm talking to Susan Charlesworth, an expert in human performance and human factors. Susan's spent over a decade training astronauts at the European Astronaut Centre and now supports individuals and organisations to tackle complex challenge and change in safety-critical industries. We talk about what leaders and organisations can learn from astronaut safety training, how to encourage innovation and avoid safety becoming a tick box exercise. We look at the personal and team dynamics that can impact human behaviours and provide insights and measures that you can take back into your own organisation. Enjoy. So I'm delighted to welcome Susan Charlesworth, who is a human factors expert, to the Leaders with Impact podcast today. Hello.
Hi, nice to be here.
So jumping straight in, I explained that you're a human factors expert, but for those who don't know what human factors are, should we just start at the very basic level?
No, it's a good place to start because it can be, and it can be so many different things as well. So some people are like real human factors, like consultants. They'll go into organizations and they will look at like the processes and the design of things and really kind of change it from within the organization. My role mainly is to do with training. So I train human factors and what it is. So what is it? It's, again, this is my explanation that there's lots of different definitions. I always say it's how humans are interacting with other humans. So communicating, leading, working as a team, making decisions, etc. But it's also how humans are interacting with the technology, the software, machinery, whatever it is that they're, that's in their work. So it's kind of a bit of both, really. Well, a lot of both. And I've mainly worked in safety critical industries, so in aviation and space, but there's also a lot of human factors experts that work in the oil and gas industry and the rail industry and healthcare as well. And the whole kind of thing is to try and help people work as efficiently and effectively with each other and with the machinery as possible so that they're not making mistakes and errors that could potentially lead to incidents and accidents as well.
Yeah, so you've basically trained astronauts in this area. So, I mean, why?
Yeah.
I mean, we'll just take a moment for that, I think. I don't think every day we come into contact with someone that trains astronauts. But why has it become such an important topic, I suppose, for areas like space exploration? It's not certainly something that I heard as a topic 20, 30 years ago, but perhaps it wasn't in that industry. I don't know.
Yeah, so probably not so much with space, to be honest. But so the whole area came about back in the 60s, 70s, and it came from the aviation industry. So they realized that a lot of aviation accidents that were occurring were actually nothing to do with the technical side of things. It wasn't the planes failing. It was because of human error, the human factor. So either the cockpit wasn't designed very well, or the pilot and the co-pilot weren't communicating very well, or, the cabin crew sometimes knew that things were going on and then they felt like they couldn't bring it forward to the pilots. So they realized, they could see these accidents occurring. And then in the 70s, there was, those of you old enough to remember, there was an awful accident that happened in Tenerife Airport where two airliners collided and crashed on the runway. And unfortunately, an awful lot of fatalities. And then after that, they kind of had a summit where they looked at all the different factors and reasons why these accidents had been occurring just in the aviation industry. And as I said, then they realised it was the human factor. And so since then, in aviation, first of all, it started off with the pilots and the co-pilots, and then later on with the cabin crew, they brought in, they call it crew resource management, CRM training. So all their crew gets CRM training, they said since kind of 70s, 80s. And then slowly other safety critical industries realised, oh yes, this is happening in our industry too. So as I said, rail, oil and gas, etc., healthcare a bit more recently. The space sector, the only reason kind of you may not have heard of it is only because there hasn't been that many astronauts in comparison to, say, pilots. So there's, I don't even know, hundreds, thousands flying every single day. Astronauts, there's less than 1,000 people have ever been into space. I don't know what the figure is now, maybe 500, 600 astronauts. So they do get training over at NASA, and they get it at the European Space Agency where I work, but there's a much smaller sample than, the pilots and that we know about.
So it's something that, you mentioned safety critical industries, and my background's in health, and it was certainly something that came to the fore in our sector a decade or so ago. And there was a couple of books that came out that everyone was reading at the time and learning from it. And I suppose there's been a particular focus in areas such as surgery because of, I suppose, the critical element of having safe surgery. What makes human factors and human factors training so transferable to lots of different and applicable, I suppose, to lots of different industries?
So I've never worked directly with the healthcare industry, but I did go to a few healthcare human factors events because, like you said, it was probably, 10, 20 years ago now. There was again, an awful case. It was a guy called Martin Bromley and his wife, Elaine, went in for routine surgery. I think it was like on her throat or something. And unfortunately, because of a number of human errors, she passed away. And there was a big investigation, as there always is with these things, and lessons learned. But her husband, Martin, was an airline pilot and he'd had all his human factors training. And so he could see all the points that, he'd been taught as an airline pilot that we just discussed, and how that could actually translate and transfer to the healthcare industry. So him with a number of other people set up the clinical human factors group. They've done a number of, lots of different research and brought out reports. And obviously now, thank goodness, it's, there's lots of books and human factors experts working directly in the healthcare industry. We hear about never events, things that shouldn't happen, and wrong site surgery and all these kind of things. But again, it's about, helping people understand, be aware of, where errors can occur, designing medical devices that are actually much more user friendly and less likely to cause problems. And as I said, I haven't worked in the industry myself, but, I understand that, things like pill bottles and the labels on them and things like that are really easily mistaken for other types of medication and stuff like that, which seems really obvious. But before, you could give the wrong dose or even take the wrong medication if you were, in a rush. So that's really become much more prevalent in that industry too.
So is it only relevant to industries where there are, I suppose, higher health and safety requirements, or is it something that is as applicable to a local shop, say, for example?
Yep, 100%. It's applicable to everyone. And actually, the more people I speak to, they're like, oh, that would really help me in my industry. And So that's why I've worked. And as I said, I work specifically for the space sector, in training astronauts. But then we realized, well, actually, the ground control team really need to know this stuff too, because the astronauts are talking to them every day. And actually, within the ground control team, you have lots of scientific experts that might be located in different countries. And actually, they need to know the communication and the teamwork and how it all feeds in. And then the people instructing them and teaching them need to know this. So even within a particular sector and organization, it goes all the way through from your astronauts down to whoever. But in different organizations as well, not just safety critical, anywhere that you've got a process, a procedure, anywhere you have humans, there is a human factor, right? So absolutely, it's applicable to every organization.
And I suppose we're not listening to you talk, and obviously we're focusing on improving safety, improving outcomes. The focus invariably becomes how do we avoid or reduce the likelihood of mistakes and harm. How does that work with, I suppose, modern leadership now is about actually it's okay to fail, and so how do you balance that when you're approaching things like human factors training and you're trying to create a no blame culture, but also needing to take accountability and ownership?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. Great question. So yeah, absolutely. And I talk about that and I give workshops on that too. Like, people want, especially again in the space sector, they always talk about innovation and being creative and problem solving and this kind of thing. And it's working, doing those kind of things. Absolutely. And, failing and learning and all the rest of it, but still doing it in a safe environment. You wouldn't want people taking risks and failing that led to loss of life. Okay, so you're still kind of doing it within a framework of safety, but it doesn't mean that your ideas have to be, crushed before you even give them a go. So yeah, there's definitely a fine balance there. But I guess the main point, as I said, is as long as it doesn't actually harm anyone or lead to loss of life, it's, you want those kind of cultures.
Yeah. And so you use the phrase framework of safety, and I had a slight vision, and it's probably being in the health sector and governance overload, that it can feel like it's just a safety checklist and you dehumanize, which kind of sounds like that isn't what the point of human factors is. It's understanding the human side of it. So again, how are you focusing on things that doesn't make it feel so process driven that you're taking out the human from it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really good point. And we in the space sector talking about, getting off the point a bit, but it comes back to it. Yeah. So the astronauts, when they go to the space station, that's kind of just above Earth, and, they're up there for 6 months and they can talk to ground directly. So anytime there's a problem, they could, talk down to Earth. They have, everything is very controlled. They have very specific procedures. They have a daily plan, literally from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep, of what they're doing throughout the day. So you could say, well, that's very controlled. Where's the human kind of element in this? But actually, obviously, especially if there was an emergency there, you need to bring the human into it there. Or again, those are very well trained for, but any kind of problem they might come up when they're doing their science experiment, they need to be able to deal with. But in the space sector, we're talking about going back to the moon, hopefully next year, and potentially going to Mars. And in those cases, you can't just call down to Earth and say, oh, I've got a problem. Things aren't going to be quite so regimented and rule driven. They are going to need to bring in the human element a lot more, which is why we're teaching leadership and followership as well, and teaching them, different ways of problem solving and making decisions themselves. So it's not just a tick box exercise that they have to follow these procedures and then get through the day. They are going to have to be a lot more creative and flexible around those things. And it's the same. I certainly don't teach it in a way like you need to do all these things and tick all these boxes and you'll be safe and get through the day. A lot of the industries and people I talk to work in very creative, very innovative industries. We've got all these new ideas and trends coming out, and AI and this, and how does human factors work with those kind of new innovations as well? So we don't have all the answers, and it's not a case of just, ticking the box and following the procedure and getting through the day. Not really the world we work in.
So breaking it down to its most basic principles, human factors training, when you're working with people, what are you focusing in on?
Yeah, so the latest example I can give, so with the astronauts, so I always create it based on the industry and specifically the people. So that one, but it started off like a more general, like what is human factors? Because the latest selection of astronauts from the European Space Agency, we had science, we had pilots, so they kind of knew the basics of it, but we also had scientists, we had a doctor or two, and we had an engineer. So there's some of them literally didn't even know what human factors was. I always get when I come in and say I'd studied psychology, like, oh, you're going to read my mind, or, this kind of thing. Or you're going to stop me from flying. It's like, no. So yes, it was kind of the basics of what human factors is, exactly what we've just talked about already. Like, why do we teach this? How the human factor can lead to errors and potentially accidents and incidents, emphasize the safety part of it. And then for them, then it went very specifically into the different human factors that they'd encounter when they went into space. But again, applicable to lots of different industries. So We were looking at the design inside the space station of the different interfaces that they'd come across. We were looking also an awful lot about and this kind of relates to healthcare in different contexts, but, at the human body as well, and the physiology and how that changes when you're in zero gravity and some of the countermeasures. So it went, as I said at the very beginning, like human factors to me is such a wide, like broad range of different things, from the human body and how you deal with yourself, to how you deal with other people, to how you deal with, the hardware and the kind of physical side of the environment as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole tangent there that you've just sparked, but I'll come back to that. I don't want to take us off on that route yet. But yeah, it's highly bespoke in some ways. Whilst human factors can sound like a catch-all term, what that means is highly individual to that organisation or that sector, and the types of things you might be honing in on. Is the objective, I suppose, to understand and identify what those factors are, or is it to measure an improvement? Like, what's the starting point that people usually say we need to start focusing in on this as an area?
Yeah. So, for example, like with aviation, they have their equivalent, they call it crew resource management training. As far as I'm aware, it's a very kind of strict syllabus, like a curriculum that they kind of have to go through, and it's quite prescribed. Mm-hmm. When I've worked with companies, everything has been bespoke because, there's the astronauts, that's obviously incredibly individual, but then other space organizations that don't have any astronauts, never send them anywhere. They're, building satellites, or they're even using the data that comes down from satellites to look at, climate change or something like that. So that's very different. So it's always working out what the organization's objectives are. Is it keeping their astronauts safe in space, or is it, I said, if you think about downstream data, having their team make sure that they're analyzing the data and they're working well together and communicating. Or another space organization that I worked with, they were looking, like what we were just talking about, they have a disruptive technology department, and they wanted their younger members to feel more confident in speaking up and speaking out and being more creative and problems. Do you know what I mean? So there's just such a different array. So yeah, the courses, at least that I create, are very bespoke, and the organizations all have very different objectives, even within the same sector.
So looking at it from a leadership point of view, and you've kind of answered this, I think, but it would be helpful just to talk about it a little bit further. Is it only effective if you work on it as a team, however big that team might be, or can it be isolated to individuals who perhaps might want individual performance improvement? And I suppose, where do you start? Is it an individual and then team, or actually it only will ever be effective if everybody is individually and team? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And yeah, I mean, in the most ideal world, everyone in the organization would at least have some training or awareness or something of what it is, because as I said, even incredibly intelligent people may have never come across this in their careers or education before. They don't even necessarily know what it is. So ideally, everyone at least gets a basic awareness and understanding of what it is, why the organization is doing this, etc. But they also, so that's on an individual level, on an organizational level. But as I said, we understand there are budgets and time constraints and everything else, that not everyone in the organization is going to get the training. So when I worked at the European Space Agency, as I said, we started off by training the astronauts, thinking, well, they're going to need it the most. They're in the most critical environment when they're on the space station. But as I said, then it actually kind of filtered down the organization. Well, the ground control team that they're talking to every single day really need to know this as well. Actually, the ground control team, they have quite a hierarchy of how they work. And they all, in terms of leadership, your flight director, how they're leading the rest of the team, they really need this kind of training too. And filtered, and all the way across to the, yeah, exactly. Even to the point that then the other instructors that were training the astronauts, they were like, well, we need this too, because it really all filters in, and through. And then as well, there's lots of different, we call them payloads. So like scientific experiments that go up on the space station, all of that, well, not all of them, most of those get reviewed by the crew, by the astronaut before they go on the space station, to make sure they're usable and they can, there's not any problems there from a usability perspective. So then I also was involved in those reviews as well from a human factors point of view. So then even the designers and engineers were also getting involved, and maybe not having the formal training, but this is the kind of things you need to think of when you're designing the interface for these scientific experiments. So yeah, as I said, in an ideal world, I obviously think everyone needs this training, but at least the kind of critical roles, or at least those people, once they're aware of the issues, can start to relay it themselves. It doesn't have to be me going in. The best way of getting buy-in is for those people in the organisation to be telling each other why it's important.
So from a senior leadership point of view, a leader is there to create the right conditions for the people who work for and with them, but they've also got to create the right conditions for themselves in order for them to be leading effectively.
Right.
Would it be, should they be starting with themselves as how do we work as an effective senior team before we start looking at tweaking the rest of it? Because actually they probably could be undermining. What I'm hearing is they could be undermining what's happening elsewhere in the organisation if they haven't tackled some of the kind of the heart or root cause of some of the issues.
Absolutely. And on a kind of more human behaviour and performance kind of soft skills training point of view, I've been asked a few times to come into organisations to train their middle managers, let's say, and then you start talking to them and kind of I always kind of I call it a debrief, but like what's the current kind of state at the moment, what's going on? And then they're always like, but the senior leader's this and the senior leader's that. And, you always blame people, don't you? It's just habits, human nature. And then even after the training, sometimes they'll be all like geared up. They want to make changes and they want to do this. And it's not that their senior leaders aren't willing. It's just that they don't now have that same training and awareness or motivation because they haven't received the same thing. So quite often I then get, actually now can you teach our senior leaders? Whereas, I think in some circumstances it would be better kind of starting at the top and filtering down, just so that everyone has the same awareness and information, really.
And what are whether it's symptoms or signals, what are the signs that the leadership team could or should be looking out for to start to identify, is this an issue that we need to resolve?
So because I work with safety critical industries, the most obvious one would be, okay, are we having accidents here? Like what's going on? But it could also be not quite so severe, incident, and especially in aviation and other critical industries, you have, confidential reporting of more minor incidents. So, looking through all the, if you want your empirical data of what's actually going on here, that's certainly a good place to start if you have that. But then obviously just listening to, what's going on in the workplace, what people are saying, and more importantly, what people are not saying as well. So if people aren't actually coming to you with problems and issues, that's one of the things that we look at. It's like the hierarchy. Are the, more junior members of the team, do they feel comfortable coming to you and talking to you about issues and problems? Because quite often they can see things that you can't. So it kind of, listening out, having some kind of forum, whether it's a formal official reporting system that, again, in aviation, they have a confidential reporting system because people don't necessarily feel comfortable with that. Or whether it's more kind of, my door is always open kind of thing, come along and, talk if you've got any issues or anything you want to raise. So I think that's really important to have some kind of process in place for that.
Yeah. Did you watch the TV show Dr. Death? Slightly off tangent.
No.
It's based on a true life story. It was on the telly probably last year, but it really struck me because the premise of it is when psychological safety fails in the healthcare setting, and this was a doctor who was fatally injuring his patients in surgery, and the process other doctors were going to try and get him struck off, and it's in America, and so they've got a whole different system. It was fascinating. But hearing what you've been talking about, there's a lot about how comfortable are people to speak up or to speak out or to raise concerns, whether that's privately or more formally. And so I'm assuming psychological safety is a really big part of human factors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I have Amy Edmondson's Fearless Organisation on my bookshelf, along with a number of others. And yeah, we talked about just culture. So it's not about like something happens, blame people and, haul them over the coals. Sometimes that might be necessary, not where I get involved, but yeah, having the psychological safety. So not just if there's an issue and a problem and potential incidents, accidents, etc. That's very important to have psychological safety and reporting that. But going back to our earlier conversation about creativity, innovation, risk taking, also having the psychological safety to feel like they're able to take those risks and to do those kind of things. So I worked with an organization that was the team was trying to be or wanted to be very innovative and come up with lots of new ideas. But the majority of the team were in their 20s. They just left university and the team leader was much more senior. And he was like, well, why aren't they coming up with all these great ideas? Why are they they just stand there with a checklist kind of thing and they're too, and I was like, yes, you're a little bit intimidating. They've just left university. They've gone through a very strict education system where there's a right and a wrong answer and you're suddenly expecting them to pop out and, come up with all these great ideas. And it can be quite scary in your first job, but not even just then, your 30s, 40s, 50s, whenever. You need to have psychological safety to speak up, speak out if there's an issue, but also, as I said, on the more positive side, if you've got ideas and opinions about things.
And again, it's kind of come through in a few of the answers that you've mentioned and that discussion there. It shows the importance of things like self-awareness and reflection and your communication skills and all of that kind of stuff. And I suppose what I'm hearing is the human factors, whilst it can be about the technological side of things and the software you use or the hardware you use, it is just as much about the non-technical skills of individuals and the so-called soft skills. I use my bunny ears because I don't like that phrase. Yeah. They get downgraded. They're just soft skills. Actually, we know that they're anything but. How do you start to, I suppose, demonstrate the importance of focusing in on those skills as an organisation, and so that they don't get relegated to just a nice little workshop we do every now and then, but it's seen as a fundamental performance indicator?
Yeah, no, I could not agree more. So when I first started working for the European Space Agency, oh gosh, I was 10, 15 years ago. That's actually what I taught originally, was human behavior and performance, we called it. Other people call it soft skills or non-technical skills. Like you, I'm not a fan of the term soft skills, only because I think they are the hardest, most challenging things to master quite often. But like the most important thing. So honestly, the way that I do it in my training is to go in, not to scare people, but to, show them the accidents, the statistics, the reports, the literally, in aviation, the death toll. This is not just a nice, fluffy, nice to have, let's all get on with each other, which is great. But this actually has real consequences if we don't. And again, depending on the organization and the industry, you could tailor that to, this is the, amount of money we're losing by not communicating properly with each other. Or this is the number of people leaving our organization because there's an issue in, the leadership of it as well. So there's definitely, you can have some hard evidence for the soft skills that are needed. But I just think, like, spend any time in any organization, the workshops, most of the time, as I said, the first thing that I run is this sort of debrief, how's everyone doing, but like, what's the kind of current state of play? And just because I'm an outsider, a psychologist, a coach, the things that come out there is quite incredible that I think the senior management may not even be aware of. And so just listening to your staff and having that psychological safety, that open door, I think is so important. You probably don't need to scare your staff with statistics. You could just sit and listen to them for an hour. You'd find out an awful lot.
Yeah. So a couple of things I wanted to touch on that you've mentioned, and it's triggered a few thoughts. So I hadn't really, and it seems really obvious now, but when you think about human factors, I have often thought in terms of communications, interpersonal skills, but actually that the conditions you are in as a person, as a human showing up. So stuff like, a woman going through the menopause or having her period, or back from having a child, and or maybe someone that's sleep deprived with or without children. There's also could be stress in the workplace, and you're taking home a whole load of baggage, and therefore you can't switch off, and therefore you don't sleep. I see that with a lot of leaders that I work with. There's so many things in terms of how we should be looking after ourselves that actually has a really significant impact on performance and the factors and how you interact. And I suppose organisations don't really give that much credence or consideration.
Yeah. Oh, so much. And as I said, like, it's one thing working, say, with pilots or astronauts, and you're kind of like, right, they need to be in peak performance, and they have very strict rules about how much sleep they have, and you can't control that, but you try, they try, and all those kind of things. But just in any organization, and all the things you just said there, I'm like, yep. I have 2 young children, not so much now, but when they were baby, coming back, trying to work after not have, a disrupted night's sleep, the lack of sleep, and I'm sure you've seen all the research too, like, is just horrendous. That's worse than anything. Like, I can give all the human factor training in the world, but if you've had a bad night's sleep, that is by far going to affect your performance more than anything else. And then, hopefully to a less critical state, but similar kind of thing, so coming back from maternity leave, again, done it twice, like, things like your confidence and, like, stuff going on in the workplace, and, and all that side of things. Like, there are so many things. They say bring your whole self to work and be your authentic self. It's not necessarily all the good things that you're going to bring, but we are humans, aren't we? Yeah. Like, those things affect us, and you can't cover it up and pretend it's not there if you're sleep deprived, or you're really stressed, or, you're going through the menopause or whatever it is. Or just, for women, our hormonal cycles affect us so much. I find it really fascinating area, actually, but you can't deny those things will affect us for better or worse.
No. Well, I saw a slight aside, but it was on the news at the weekend about the Welsh rugby team, the female Welsh rugby team. I don't know if you saw that, but they're doing a piece of work looking at menstrual cycles and concussion. And actually, all the research has been focused around, obviously, male rugby players. And there's this whole thing around how women's bodies will be reacting differently to the injuries they might be picking up at play. I mean, that is human factors, isn't it? In guys, and you just perhaps wouldn't have thought of it in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I won't go off topic, but I'm really interested in this subject. And, like, if you look at a lot of the research into anything, pretty much, it's been male subjects up until very, very recently, because they're much easier to study in terms of all those kind of things. Whereas women, depending where they're at in terms of their age and life, but also in terms of their cycle, can really affect, the kind of, on the medical side of things, at least, where they're at. But also there's been a lot of research in terms of going back to the human factors, in terms of designing things better for women as well. So one of the things even that I taught the astronauts was about anthropometrics and biomechanics. So looking at the difference between, like, strength and reach, things like that. And again, space originally has been designed for males. So, how do we adapt that to more female astronauts and that as well? So,
and I suppose we've got that challenge with more organisations also having multi-generational workforces. So, and we've never really explored what that might look like, and how people's needs might be different at different stages of their life when they're at the organisation, and therefore what their perceptions of how people behave and interact change and shift. So you could be working at a multi-dimensional level as well when you're exploring this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as one example, went to a space conference that won't be named a couple of weeks ago, and I had a really good friend and kind of work colleague, and he went on a different day to me, because if I'd have been there, my God, okay. So he's taking shared parental leave with his wife. His wife has now done 6 months of maternity leave, gone back to work. He's now doing paternity leave, looking after his baby. and took the baby, 6 months old, strapped to his chest, took to the conference, so she could go back to work and he can still be involved in everything, and was told that he wasn't allowed in the venue because they didn't have children. And it's just like, and okay, there could be very practical reasons for that, but I completely understand if it was young toddlers running around or children screaming about. Yeah, I get that, we're in a workplace, but a baby fast asleep strapped to your chest, so you can work and your wife can work. And I just think there's definitely some some generational issues there, and kind of what really is the problem. Is it just the perception problem here, like what's going on? We're saying we're diverse and inclusive, but are we actually? How better to support women in any workplace than to support their partners that share the childcare, for example. So there's definitely things still need to change in that department.
Gosh. So we could talk about this for forever. Whole other episode. The other thing, and you mentioned this briefly, but I was thinking AI are there AI factors that will human factors training need to change to take into effect that humans might not be doing certain tasks because AI what's the implications with that?
So I'm really interested in this. I mean, I am not an AI expert whatsoever, obviously dabbled in it, as I'm sure we all have, but I think it's going to be incredibly, it already is really interesting, like how humans are interacting with it and how it's kind of working. And, the kind of, obviously trust is the main thing. Like, do you trust it to actually do these things and the answers it gives you, or, whatever the context is, or are you trusting it too much? So there's a whole factor there, of how humans are interacting with it and the kind of data produced and all that side of things. So I think that's going to be really interesting. And, innovative industries like space are really looking into it and how it can help us, because that's the other thing as well. I personally don't believe, it's not AI and robots are going to take over the world. I think they're going to be incredibly beneficial to most industries, but it's how we integrate them. You said the trust factor as well, how much we use them, what we're using them for. I don't think they'll ever replace humans, but we need to just think a bit more about how we're actually the human factor in using this new technology.
Yeah. And there's something about, I'm hearing more and more organisations and sectors talk about we need to do more with less, and therefore turn to technology as a way to answer some of those questions. But we always know sometimes if you cut corners, you end up with safety issues or performance issues and whatnot. So absolutely considering the human factors to those types of initiatives is important.
Yeah. And this isn't AI, but if we think about like automation of things, we talked about in the space sector, about automating certain things, but then not becoming complacent, thinking, oh, that's automated, they're doing that. And then something happens and they're completely now, lost awareness of the situation and are now going to have to like jump in at the worst possible point if it's an emergency to take over and sort out, resolve the issue. So we've, been talking about that for quite a while now. So AI is going to be the next thing to think, okay, how do you integrate it? How can we make sure it's beneficial to us? But that we're not overly relying on it and trusting it too much or not enough.
So if a leader is listening to this and they've recognise perhaps for the first time that focusing on human factors could really make a difference to their organisation's performance, where do they start? Because we've demonstrated how kind of wide and deep you can go with this topic.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. Well, completely depending on the sector. It depends whether if they just recognise that it could potentially be something really beneficial, then obviously, some awareness and training. If they have really specific problems that are arising, as I said, whether it's through reporting or incidents or accidents occurring in the sector, then there might be much more work to be done in terms of getting an expert in. As I said, not something I do, but there's lots of human factors organisations out there with consultants that will literally come in and work with your organisation for, a period of time to actually change, whatever it might be, from procedures and processes and things to the actual design of hardware. So there's a wide breadth of different things that could be done. Certainly, as I said, I think an awareness piece and the training of what it is, why we're doing it is a good starting point.
Yeah. So awareness in the broadest sense so that they understand the importance, but then real clarity in what's their purpose in exploring it further.
Yeah.
So my final question is one that I ask all our guests that come on here. It's, what's your one piece of advice about human factors that you wish leaders would pay more attention to?
One, just one.
Just
that's
one.
Okay. So I love Brene Brown. This is just me making this up now. So I love Brene Brown, and I don't know. So I remember when she was giving a talk or in one of her books, and she says, like, when she got really nervous and was really worried about giving this talk, and then she reminded herself, and there's a great quote, I'm going to completely mess it up now, but about like, people are people. And she always says that, like, people are people. They're just people. They're just people. And they are. So I just think, obviously I know quite a lot about psychology and people, and that's what I absolutely love. And I work with them all the time. So I just think whenever I go into organizations and they're like, oh, we've got it all sorted, we've got this, we've got that, like, yeah, but people are people. Like, we mess up or we do great things. I mean, that's the thing as well. I think that's actually, maybe better piece of advice is it's not that people are going to mess up and you've got to control them and you've got to, slap more rules on them and give them more, whatever, safety protection equipment. It's also, we were saying all the benefits of having people in your organization coming up with great ideas and innovative solutions and things. So it's working, with their strengths and weaknesses, or challenges as well. So I think that's a big thing. And as I said, when I'm working with space organizations, they say, oh, we don't have astronauts, like, but it's, yes, but you have people in your organization. They're the ones, designing these things, building these things, operating them. Like, you may never see an astronaut in your whole career, but like, and the same in the other sectors like healthcare, but you have people in your organization. So, that's the human factor, right?
Yeah. People are people. That's perfect to end it on. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to get in touch to share their thanks for all the great insights you've given today, how can they find you?
So LinkedIn, I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. So I'm Susan Charlesworth on LinkedIn. And then my website is Charlesworth Human Performance. They want to find out a little bit more about the kind of work I do. So yeah.
Fab. I'll put all the details in the show notes for people.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Leah. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and let me know what you thought on LinkedIn. You can find me at Lee Griffith. I'll be back with the next episode in 2 weeks' time. So in the meantime, sign up to my newsletter at sundayskies.com for monthly insights on how else you can lead with impact. Until next time.